There are people who walk into your life so early that you do not remember a time before them. They are just there, part of the furniture of your childhood, part of the background of every memory, so woven into the ordinary texture of your growing up that you stop seeing them clearly because you have never known a version of your life without them in it. And then one day something shifts, a light changes, you look up and you see them, really see them, and everything you thought you understood about the shape of your own life rearranges itself without asking your permission. His name was Finn Calloway. He had been my brother's best friend since they were 8 years old. That made him a permanent fixture of my life from the age of 5, when I was small enough that the two of them treated me as either a mascot or an obstacle depending on the day. He had eaten dinner at our table more times than I could count. He had slept on the floor of my brother's room in a sleeping bag on countless Friday nights. He had been in the background of every significant childhood memory I had: birthday parties, summers in the backyard, the years when everything was simple and nobody had to think about what anything meant. I was 23 now, Finn was 26, same as my brother Marcus. And I had been in love with him for approximately 4 years while doing an extremely thorough job of pretending I was not. My name is Joel Hartley. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the city of Renwich, 2 hours from the town where Marcus and I had grown up. I worked as a junior copywriter at a small agency downtown. I had a good life, a manageable life, a life I had built carefully around a central empty space that I had been careful not to look at directly. The empty space was the specific shape of a person I could not have. He was my brother's best friend. The rule wrote itself. It had no exceptions and no gray areas, and I had followed it with the discipline of someone who understood what the cost of breaking it would be and had decided the cost was too high. Then the storm happened. Marcus had planned a weekend at our parents' house in Greenville. The house was empty, they were in Portugal for their anniversary, and Marcus wanted to use it for what he called a proper catch-up weekend, which meant the three of us, some decent food and no obligations. He had said the three of us, meaning himself, me, and Finn, who drove up from the city separately. The storm system that had been building over the coast all week arrived on Friday evening, faster and heavier than any forecast had predicted. By 7 o'clock the roads were closing. By 8 the power in Greenville was flickering. By 9 Finn's car had a slow tire that became a flat tire on the road outside town, and Marcus drove out in the rain to help him and came back with Finn and without his own car, which had gotten stuck in mud on the verge. Marcus came through the door soaking wet and said, "Finn is staying tonight, obviously. Roads are closed anyway." And that was how it started. We had dinner, the three of us, by candlelight because the power had gone out properly by 9:30. My mother kept good candles and my father kept good wine, and the kitchen table looked, in that light, like something from a different era. Marcus was in good form, he always was in the house we grew up in. It brought something easy and warm out of him. And Finn was the way Finn always was, which was present and funny and attentive in a way that I had spent 4 years pretending not to notice. Finn Calloway was not conventionally the most obvious person in a room. He did not fill space the way some people did. He was thoughtful rather than loud, observant rather than performing. He had the specific quality of someone who listened to what you were actually saying rather than what they were expecting you to say. And he remembered things, small things, things you mentioned once and forgot you had mentioned, and he brought them back weeks later in ways that made you feel specifically seen. This was not a useful quality for someone I was trying not to be in love with. After dinner, Marcus fell asleep on the couch by 10:30 in the way he always fell asleep in this house, which was quickly and completely the specific surrender of someone who was very comfortable. Finn and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table with the candles burning low and the storm doing its serious work outside the windows. The rain was the kind that turned the windows into something else entirely. Not glass anymore, just moving water and the occasional lightning and the sense of the world outside being a different, wilder thing than usual. Finn poured 2 more glasses of wine. He said, "Marcus is done." I said, "He always does this here, this house turns him off like a switch." Finn smiled, he looked toward the living room doorway and then back at the candles. He said, "I have not been here in a while." I said, "How long?" He said, "Maybe 2 years, things got busy, you know how it goes." I said, "Yeah." We sat in that quiet for a moment, the storm outside, the candles between us, the house doing the thing old family houses do in bad weather, which is feel very solid and very containing, like the walls know they are needed. He said, "How are you actually doing, not the version you tell people." I looked at him. This was a Finn thing, the way he asked questions. He always flagged when he wanted the real answer rather than the manageable one, and somehow the flagging made the real answer easier to give. I said, I am okay, some days are better than others, I like the work enough, the city is good, I am figuring things out. He said, what things? I said, the usual things, who I am, what I want, what I am doing with the particular version of my life I am currently living. He said, that is a lot of things. I said, it is an ongoing project. He looked at me carefully. He said, are you happy? I thought about it the way I had learned to think about questions from Finn, which was actually. Some of it. I said, not all of it. I think I have been waiting for something to clarify and it has not clarified yet. He nodded. He said, I know that feeling. I said, do you? He said, yeah, I have been in it for a while. I looked at him, something in the way he said it, not the casual admission of a manageable frustration, something older and heavier. What are you waiting to clarify? I said. He looked at the candle between us. He said, something I have known for a long time that I have been careful about. The storm outside rattled the kitchen window. We looked at each other across the table. I said, Finn. He said, yeah. I said, what does careful mean? He said, it means I know what I feel and I have known for a long time and I have kept it in a particular place because the complications around it felt bigger than what I wanted to do about it. Something was happening in the room. I said, what complications? He looked at the candle for a moment and then at me. He said, I think you know what complications. The candle between us burned low and the storm pressed against the house from all directions and Marcus slept in the next room and everything that had been in a particular place for 4 years was suddenly in a different one. I said, this is not a conversation I was expecting to have tonight. He said, neither was I, but I have been stuck on a country road in the rain with a flat tire, and I think the universe is running out of patience with my particular brand of careful. I looked at him. He looked at me. Outside the storm was absolute. Inside the kitchen was very still. I need to go back a little. 4 years ago I was 19 and home for Christmas and Finn had come for the annual Christmas Eve gathering that had been happening since we were children. It was the usual thing, family and neighbors and the particular warm chaos of a house full of people and good food and noise. I had been standing in the kitchen refilling something when he appeared in the doorway. We had talked normal conversation, the kind of conversation we had always had, easy and without effort, the kind that did not require maintenance. He had asked about my first semester at university and I had told him about it and he had listened the way he listened, completely. And at some point he had laughed at something I said and looked at me in the kitchen light and something happened inside me that I did not have a name for at 19 and did not need a name for because I put it away immediately. I put it away because he was 22 and I was 19 and he was Marcus's best friend and those were 3 separate reasons that added up to an absolute no. I had been putting it away ever since. But it was still there. Every Christmas, every family gathering, every time Marcus invited both of us somewhere and we ended up in the same room, the feeling did not get smaller with management, it just got more contained, more precise, the specific weight of something that knew exactly what it was and was not being allowed to say so. At 21 I had come out, not dramatically. I had told Marcus first, who had said I know and I love you and nothing changed between us, which was the best possible outcome and I was grateful for it. I had told my parents, who were similarly fine and similarly unsurprised. I had told my friends at university. I had told everyone in the categories of people I told things. I had not told Finn. Not because I did not trust him, because telling Finn felt different from telling anyone else and the reason it felt different was the reason I could not say. Now we were sitting across from each other in a candlelit kitchen in a storm and he had said something I have known for a long time and I think you know what complications and everything was different. I said I need to ask you something directly. He said okay. I said are you gay? He looked at the candle, not away from me, just at the candle for a moment. Then he looked back at me and said yes. The word sat between us in the candlelight. I said does Marcus know? He said no, I have not said it to anyone yet, you are the first person. Something about that landed in a specific place. I said why me first? He said, because you are the person I trust most with the things that are real, you always have been. Even when you were 5 and following me and Marcus around the backyard, you had this way of looking at things that made you seem like you understood more than you were supposed to at that age. I looked at him. He said, and because the thing I have been careful about, you are part of it. The storm outside, the candles, Marcus sleeping in the next room. I said, Finn. He said, I know all the reasons. Marcus is my best friend and you are his younger brother, and the whole thing is complicated in ways I have spent a long time being practical about. I said, and now? He said, and now I am sitting in this kitchen at 11 at night in a storm with a glass of wine, and you looked at me and asked what I was waiting to clarify, and I answered honestly, which I have apparently been waiting to do. I said, how long? He said, since you were 19, Christmas. You were standing in the kitchen and you were telling me about your first semester and you laughed at something, and I thought something I have been trying not to think since then. Christmas 4 years ago, the kitchen, him looking at me in the light. I said that was the same night for me. He was very still. I said I put it away immediately because you were 22 and I was 19 and you were Marcus's best friend, and all of those things were true and still are. He said, and yet. I said, and yet. We looked at each other. He said, what do we do with this? I said, I do not know, the Marcus part is real. He is your best friend and my brother, and we cannot just make a decision that affects him without talking to him. He said, I know. I said, but I also, Finn, I have been carrying this for 4 years, and you have been carrying it for 4 years. And we are both sitting here having admitted it, and I am not sure what the right next step is, but I know that going back to carrying it quietly is not available to me anymore. He said, me neither. He reached across the table. Not to take my hand, just to put his hand on the table near mine, close, an offering rather than a claim. I looked at his hand. I put mine next to it. We sat like that, not holding on, just close, the candlelight between us going lower. He said, can I tell you something? I said, yes. He said, I have thought about what it would mean for Marcus, and I think the version I have been afraid of, where it ruins everything, is not the only version. Marcus loves you, and he cares about me, and what he wants for both of us is for us to be okay. I think I have been afraid of a version of him that is not actually him. I said, I have thought the same thing. I think he would need time. I think it would be a conversation rather than a crisis, but I do not know. He said we would have to tell him. I said, yes, before anything, he has to know. He nodded. He said, okay. I said, okay. His hand was still near mine on the table. I looked at the storm through the window. I said, are you scared? He said, yes, you. I said, yes, but a different kind of scared than I have been for 4 years. This kind at least means something is actually happening. He said, yeah, the other kind was just static. I said, exactly, just static. The candle between us went out. We sat in the dark for a moment. Then he got up and found the box of matches my mother kept on the counter and lit it again and sat back down, and the small flame came back between us. He said, I am glad the tire went flat. I said, I am glad the road's closed. He almost smiled. He said, what a way to finally have this conversation. I said, there was never going to be a dignified way to have this conversation. He said, no, probably not. We sat until the storm began to ease, which was somewhere around 1 in the morning, and then we both went to sleep, him in Marcus's old room, me in mine, and I lay in my childhood bed listening to the last of the rain and thought about 4 years and a kitchen at Christmas and a hand near mine on a table, and what came next. What came next was Marcus. Marcus woke up at 8 with the specific energy of someone who had slept extremely well and was pleased about it. He came into the kitchen where Finn and I were already up and drinking coffee and said good morning to both of us and poured his own cup and sat at the table and looked at us. He said, you two stayed up late. I said, the storm kept us up. He said, yeah, it was something. He looked at his coffee. Then he looked up with the specific expression of my brother when he was assessing something. He said, everything okay? Neither Finn nor I said anything for a moment. Marcus looked at Finn, then at me, then back at Finn. He said, okay, what happened? Finn said, nothing bad, we need to talk to you about something. Marcus put his cup down. He said, that sentence has never preceded good news. Finn said, it is not bad news, it is just a thing we should have said sooner. Marcus looked between us again and I watched something move across his face, not anger, more like a person rapidly assembling information they have just been given. He said, "How long?" I said, "What?" He said, "How long have you two been, whatever this is?" I said, "We are not anything yet. We talked last night for the first time about the fact that there is something there." Marcus was quiet. He looked at his coffee mug. Finn said, "Marcus, I know this is complicated. I know I am your best friend and Joel is your brother and the whole thing is not simple. And I want to be honest with you because you deserve to know and because I am not willing to do anything that damages what you and I have. You are my best friend, that does not change." Marcus was quiet for a long time. I watched him, my brother who I knew very well, who I could read from the set of his shoulders and the way he held his jaw. He was not angry. He was processing. Finally he said, "Finn, how long?" Finn said, "4 years." Marcus looked at him. He said, "4 years." Finn said, "I did not say anything because, you know why." Marcus said, "Because of me." Finn said, "Because of you and because I did not know how and because I was not ready and because all of it together made it easier to be careful." Marcus turned and looked at me. He said, "And you?" I said the same, 4 years, the Christmas when I was 19. Marcus looked at the kitchen table. Then he said, "Joel, you know you could have told me." I said, "I know, I think I was afraid of exactly this, the conversation." He said, "This conversation is not that bad." I said, "It feels that way from where I am sitting." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I have known you were gay since you were about 17. I was waiting for you to tell me on your own time. I did not want to push it." I stared at him. He said, "I am your brother, I know you." I said, "You have known for 6 years and never said anything." He said, "I was waiting for you, it was not my thing to say first." I sat with that. Finn said, "Marcus." Marcus looked at him. Finn said, "I need you to tell me honestly what you actually think, not the version that manages my feelings, the real one." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He said, "The real one is this: you are my best friend, Joel is my brother, the two most important people in my life, and you have both been carrying something alone for 4 years because you were trying to protect me and I did not know and could not tell you that you did not need to." He stopped. He said, "The real one is that I want both of you to be okay, and if okay for both of you is each other, then I am not going to stand in the way of that. I would be a pretty poor excuse for a brother and a best friend if I did." He picked up his coffee. He said, "I do need a minute, not because I am angry, just because it is a lot to adjust to." He said it honestly, not performing patience, actually asking for what he needed. I said, "Take whatever time you need." He said, "I will." He got up and went out to the back garden where the storm had left everything washed and dripping, and the morning was that specific clean quality that comes after heavy rain. He stood out there for about 20 minutes and Finn and I sat at the table and did not speak much. Then he came back in. He looked at Finn. He said, "Do not hurt him." Finn said, "I will not." Marcus said, "I know, I just needed to say it." He sat back down. He said, "Okay, we are fine, all 3 of us, but I am going to be extremely smug about this for the rest of my life because I called it." I said, "You did not call anything, you had no idea." He said, "Joel, I have been watching the 2 of you fail to look at each other normally for approximately 3 years. I had some idea." Finn said, "That is mortifying." Marcus said deeply, "You were both terrible at it." I said, "We were very subtle." He said, "You were not even a little subtle." Finn laughed, a real one, the relief in it was audible. I laughed too. Marcus looked between us with the expression of someone who was still adjusting but had decided to adjust with good grace because the alternative was worse, and because he was, fundamentally, a good person who loved the people he loved. The rest of that morning was the 3 of us, the way it always had been. Breakfast that Marcus made because he was the best cook of the 3 of us. The kitchen table with the storm-washed morning outside the windows. Conversation that went everywhere and nowhere and eventually settled into the easy rhythm that only existed between people who had known each other long enough that they did not have to perform anything. It was the same, except it was not. It was lighter. The thing that had been in the room unacknowledged for 4 years was no longer in the room, it was out on the table like everything else. That afternoon, the roads cleared and Finn drove back to the city. I was going back too. We drove separately because that was how we had come and there was no reason yet to change the logistics. But at the door, before we both left, he stopped and Marcus had already gone to check on his car, and it was just the two of us in the hallway of the house we had both grown up in different ways. He said, "Can I call you this week?" I said yes. He said, "Not just to check in, actually call to talk." I said, "I know what you meant." He said, "I want to do this properly, whatever this is, I want to take the time to do it right." I looked at him, this man I had known since I was 5. This man whose laugh I knew better than almost any sound. This man who had sat across from me in a candle-lit kitchen in a storm and said something I have known for a long time and put his hand near mine on the table. I said, "Finn, take all the time you need, I am not going anywhere." He looked at me. He said, "4 years and you are still here." I said, "4 years and you are still here too." He nodded. He said, "Okay, good, that is a good place to start." He left. I stood in the hallway of my parents' house for a moment. Then I went and found Marcus checking the tires on his car in the driveway. He looked up at me. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, you." He said, "I think so, give me a week." I said, "Take whatever you need." He said, "I know." He straightened up and looked at me. He said, "Joel, I meant what I said, I want you to be okay, both of you." I said, "I know you did." He said, "And for the record, he has looked at you the same way since that Christmas when you were 19. I know because I was there, I just did not know what to do with it." I said, "You could have said something." He said, "It was not mine to say, same as yours." I looked at my brother in the cleared morning after the storm. I said, "Thank you for how you handled that." He said, "I am not doing anything special, I am just being your brother." I said, "That is the special thing." He looked at me and then back at the tire and said nothing, which was the Marcus way of receiving something that had landed. The weeks that followed were the careful and honest weeks of something beginning properly. Finn called on Tuesday. We talked for 2 hours, not about the storm or the kitchen or the moment, about everything else. About his life and mine and the things that mattered and the things that did not, and the way the conversation went when there was no longer a particular thing in the way of it. He came to the city the following weekend. We went for dinner, the two of us, for the first time in our lives without Marcus as the organizing reason. A restaurant he had been to before and recommended, and it was exactly right. We talked until the place started putting chairs on tables around us. Walking back through the city afterward, he reached over and took my hand. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just reached over and held my hand, and we walked through the city at night like two people who had found their way to something that had been there for a long time. He said, "Marcus texted me." I said, "What did he say?" He said, "Take care of my brother," and then he said also, "Finally." I laughed. He said, "He is going to be insufferable about this forever." I said, "He already is." He said, "Worth it." I said, "Completely." We walked the rest of the way in the comfortable quiet that had always existed between us but was different now. Not the quiet of something being withheld, the quiet of something that had found its place and was settled in it. 3 months later, I was at Finn's apartment for the first time. He had cooked, which turned out to be something he did well and had been modest about. We ate at his table and talked the way we had been talking for months now, easily, fully, without the particular weight that had been in the way for 4 years. After dinner, he showed me a photograph he had found while unpacking a box of things from his childhood home. It was from a barbecue at our parents' house. Marcus and Finn were in the center of the frame doing something teenage and foolish. And in the background, 5 years old and very small, was me, looking directly at the camera with an expression of absolute seriousness. He said, "I found this last week, I kept looking at it." I looked at it. I said, "I was a very serious child." He said, You always looked like you were thinking about something." I said, "I probably was." He said, "What do you think 5-year-old you was thinking in this exact moment?" I looked at the photograph, at the small serious face in the background while the older boys were loud and careless in the center. I said, "Probably something about how it would all make sense eventually." He looked at me. He said, "Did it?" I looked at him across his kitchen table with the photograph between us. I said, "Yes, it took a while, but yes." He reached across and took the photograph and put it on the counter and reached back across for my hand. I gave it to him. Outside his apartment window, the city was doing its evening thing, and the sky had the specific dark blue of a clear autumn night, and somewhere across the city Marcus was probably at home and probably fine. And the three of them were all fine in the way of people who had negotiated something that mattered and come out the other side with what they had intact and something new added to it. It had taken 4 years and a storm and a candle-lit kitchen and a conversation that neither of us had planned. But it had happened. And everything that came from it was real and certain and built on a foundation of the most honest kind of knowing, which is the kind that waits.